Right, well, good morning to you all. This year has been for most moths and other insects the Annus horribilis, for many interrelated reasons, with climate change most likely at the top of the list. Many mothers, including regional coordinators and those reporting on their various blogs, have bemoaned the lack of catches. However, before discussing the state of the moth world, I would like to show the distribution of our recorders around the UK, Ireland, and the Channel Islands. No? Okay. For those unfamiliar with my Vice County map, the locations of the recorders are shown by red circles. Their positions on the map are not geographically related, so do not be surprised if you see yourself sitting on a mountain or somewhere else in a different part of your county. There are also colored vice counties without a dot in them. These are vice counties where a recorder started in March, but for some reason, including ill health, work, moving house, etc., could not continue. The number of recorders shown here are taken from the fourth quarter records, so they may not be completely accurate. If a recorder was slow in sending in records, then he or she is not shown here, but of course they will be included in the final roundup carried out by Audrey. The East Midlands leads the way with 42 recorders, and believe me, it was difficult putting all those dots into those 6 vice counties. With 18 crowded into Vice County 57, Vice County 64 is left all on its own on the East Coast. Likewise, both Wales and the Northwest come second, with large concentrations in a couple of vice counties, leaving isolated ones further away from the centres of activity. Some vice counties have more recorders than others, and it would be much better for a nationwide survey to have a greater distribution of recorders all over the regions. Wales in particular is a case in point, where South Wales has a good concentration of recorders, while North and West Wales counties are barely covered. They may look small on this map, but the areas involved are huge. Vice County 50, which is on the Slieve Peninsula in North Wales, shows 1 recorder, but Marjorie Griffin actually runs 2 traps. I hope I have not missed anyone out, but my apologies if I've done so. Okay. Leaving the map, this slide shows the proportions of recorders in each region listed in a sort of north to south pattern, as shown by the geographical table on the right. I prefer to list the regions this way instead of in alphabetical order because it seems to make more sense working one's way around the country from north to south. Okay, next. This slide expands the previous one to show the percentage catch for each region, but with 2 tables. The one on the left lists the regions in descending order of moth catches, so you can see where your region is in comparison to others. More will be discussed in a few moments. The percentage catch is, of course, related to the number of recorders and the moth core. Do not feel left out if your catches are less than others, as these are still valuable, giving useful information about the area. Certainly the catches from our garden are in this lower category. Habitat is a crucial factor here. Despite my leaving the garden to run to nature and allowing the adjacent fields to grow unchecked for the summer periods, we are, of course, like an oasis, surrounded by grassland that looks wonderful, but is low in diversity and intensively grazed. We also trap for ourselves in the adjacent woodland and get much better results. Throughout this last year, the quarterly reports have been showing a marked lack of moths compared with last year. This chart shows the 4 quarters of 2023, orange, and 2024, blue. Until week 15, about halfway through the second quarter, the levels have been somewhat level pegging. However, from this week until week 29, at the start of quarter 4, 2023 catches were significantly higher than this year. After that, bar a few exceptions at the end of the year, the catches this year were slightly better. When looking at the regional positions between 2023 and 2024, there were a few shifts in regional percentage catches, as shown in these 2 tables, where some of the major changes have been highlighted. Wales shifted upwards from level 4 to level 2, and Ireland rose from level 10 to level 5. Surprisingly, the two powerhouses, namely the southeast and the southwest, performed very poorly, with only 1.8 and 3.1% respectively. This is a big fall from grace from level 4 to levels 10 and 11. Perhaps this is not surprising after hearing comments from some of their recorders about how poor their catches were this year, such as another poor quarter to end what was a disappointing year. Okay. The drop in moth numbers in the southeast and southwest is shown in this slide, which depicts the drastic difference in numbers between the 2 years. In this slide, the same result for each region is shown twice in a different manner to help show the situation. The top two charts are the standard histograms showing the mean number of moths in both years. The bottom two, however, show them by subtracting the 2023 weekly mean values from those of 2024. In other words, 2024 minus 2023. Both of these versions show what a poor year these two regions had. This shows how this year compared with the previous years to 2014. This demonstrates the problem that nature has been facing this year. Although we are well aware that moth numbers are decreasing, this chart is an overall indicator of moth numbers. After identifying the good or bad years, you can drill down through the data to find out whether it was just a uniform drop in numbers or just a few species making a difference. Therefore, we must have a solid data foundation to predict future trends. The difficulty in producing hard evidence to the bean counters in government and industry means that they could say it's just been a bad year and leave it at that. A quick look at some of the years shows that 2021 followed a good year, while 2024 was disastrous. Yet when looking at the data, the number of species trapped in 2024 was similar to 2020. But the number of moths caught in high numbers was much lower, as shown by the number of moths with a mean number greater than 20. Overall, a cold late spring was the first contributing factor, leading to a point emphasized by Springwatch, where the birds struggled to find enough caterpillars to feed themselves and their young. Also, here on a local reserve, bird box surveys showed a preponderance of nest failures due to the lack of caterpillars to feed the young. This situation is a bit like the chicken and the egg. Without a good flight and moth mating season over the previous winter and early spring, there will not be sufficient eggs, and without eggs, there will not be caterpillars. Often when this situation arises, Mother Nature steps up the pace to fill the void. Not so this year, with cold, wet, and windy weather being the predominant theme. This description is not only on a national scale, but has been seen in various European, North and South American countries, where in one study forest, the only discernible factor was climate change. This slide shows the quarterly mean distribution of 4 moths from 2017 to 2024. The chosen moths are examples of the quarters they are most prolific in. Each picture shows a mean number per year in the form of a line chart, showing the progress from 2021 to 2024, with a histogram depicting the weekly number of moths in 2024. The line chart is self-explanatory, showing the gradual decline in the number of moths per year. The histogram part for each moth shows the weekly number for 2024 and gives an idea for which quarter they were found in. The colors red, green, blue, and purple indicate the quarters that they were recorded in. Each horizontal axis starts with the beginning of the moth year. I haven't labeled the axis as the idea is meant to be more graphical than scientific. Although intended to show the quarters moth, each one extends well beyond the GMS divisions, notably the heart and dart and the right band wave. Okay. Changes in agriculture can have a significant effect. Pesticides or ploughing are obvious reasons, but a change in grazing can be a problem. I believe Roger Freestone mentioned some years ago how changing a local flower meadow to a horse-grazed bowling green wiped out the number of feeding larvae. This photo shows the farmers plowing the fields prior to resowing with a grass clover mix without leaving an understood border around the edges. The picture on the right is from the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, showing how much land is improved pasture. Good for farm animals, but disastrous for nature. Street lights are a constant problem to moth recorders, with the moths being attracted to the lights and not to the traps. These lights attract the moths, which then attract the moth-eating bats. Dr. Avalon Owens spoke at the annual moth recorders meeting of butterfly conservation, demonstrating some of the problems that light pollution caused. Without wanting to interfere with the next speakers today, I would just like to mention that Dr. Owens put in a plea to reduce the number of lights and draw the curtains to avoid attracting the moths. This photo shows our neighbor's strong outdoor light, which is on when she puts her chickens away for the night. As for drawing the curtains to stop extraneous lights, we are just as guilty, as we want to see what moths are flying that night. Certainly this year has been a bad one for insects in general, with reports from different countries showing decline in number. Even for us in our valley, where farming practices and the absence of street lighting have been unchanged for many years, the numbers have changed for the worse. Okay? The Welsh Government has issued guidelines on cutting down extraneous lights, ranging from street lights to households, to reduce lights escaping upwards. While this planning may apply to future developments, there is little chance people will follow them unless they are given some incentive to comply with the new planning rules. So don't hold your breath, okay? This slide shows the annual rainfall for the years 2021 to 2024. The rainfall pattern has been fairly similar on the west coast and in the north. This only shows the total amount of rainfall and not the dry gaps in between. The biggest differences have been in the east and southeast of the country. To this end, I have shown pie charts for the east of England blue, East Midlands red, and the southeast green. It is interesting to see how they vary in relation to drought conditions. The very dry weather can be hard for the larvae, as leaves develop tough outer cells, making it harder for the larvae to bite into the leaves. The rain itself may not be the main problem, unless it is heavy enough to wash the caterpillars off the leaves, of course. We attended a North Wales moth course with David Brown, and on the first evening, the rain poured down, and I thought, what a waste it was. What a waste of time it was coming up here. In the morning, however, the catches were wonderful, showing the moths will fly through rain if necessary. Therefore, it was not just rain that was the problem this year. It was probably the added feature of cold winds and low temperatures that sealed their fate. Okay? My thanks to all those who filled in the additional moths in the lower section of the recording form. It has been extremely interesting listing these extra moths. This table shows the top 30 micromoths with their new vernacular names. Occasionally, I felt like a code breaker, working out their names, which can be entered in various ways. Code, both old and new, scientific and vernacular names. Sometimes names are only partially filled in or incorrectly spelled, with occasionally the incorrect code. In all, there were 4,958 entries, combined to reveal 350 species, of which 104 will be removed with a new recording form. This figure may be slightly inaccurate, with, for example, the bird cherry ermine. While this has been elevated, it may be mistaken for the orchard apple ermines that some recorders have often grouped with the bird cherry ermine. Some recorders may query the inclusion of the orchard ermine separate from the apple orchard ag, but I assume that these recorders knew more about them than I do. For those recorders who have sent the moths incorrectly, this form can be converted and sent off to your county moth recorder. I believe this will be covered by Mike Cook later on today, and I've used one of his order programs, which works extremely well. One problem that has dogged me this last year is the interest in the new vernacular names for the micromoths. Many recorders prefer using Latin, which is universal in bridging different languages. Do I upset the old brigade who have grown up with Latin, or upset the modern generation who prefer to use names they can both pronounce or remember? Well, it looks like my problem has now been solved, as the top list is now with new names. So for the next year, I will continue altering these names to my database as I receive them from willing recorders. Right, thank you much. Right, Norman, over to you. Norman, are you awake?
Please stays on Zoom.
Still muted.
You're muted.
Oh,
Well, Norman needs to.
Norman, you're muted. That's it.
Yeah, we're halfway through your time, Evan, so we've got plenty of time to for questions. And are there any questions, Audrey? Feel free to ask them, anybody, because we have plenty of time.
Only have we? Is that 10 minutes?
I think there may be questions when we've all had time to look at that presentation again. It was excellent and quite very interesting. And I, for one, will certainly look at it on wherever it's going to be produced again, because there was a lot to take in. But thank you, Evan, for such a very interesting and comprehensive presentation.
Right, please, you enjoyed it.
Yeah, just looking at Bob Haycock here from Pembrokeshire. Just looking at the southwest, which I think you said southwest of England has obviously it dropped through the scale. I mean, I think when I look at my own records or our own records for the last 10, 15 years, we dropped considerably last year. And I kind of think because we're in the southwest of Wales, we're probably more like southwest England here.
Yeah,
sounds like it, doesn't it?
Okay, not too far away.
Yeah, it was a disastrous year. But rain isn't a problem at all for Moth. I never have a problem with rain. It's wind problem. And we had 4 named storms that came through in the late winter and into the spring period, and that must have devastated invertebrates. And the hedgerow cutting that's going on around here, plus the amazing amount of spraying that's going on in the farmland. I've never seen so much herbicide being sprayed, and it's massive in this area.
Did anybody find an increase in moths in 2024? Did anybody at all find that there was a reasonable year for moths? No, everybody found it was a bad year.
Could I ask a question?
What?
I'm Jill Key. I'm in Shropshire. I noted one of your slides showed 2019 appeared to be a peak year for moths. I think it was the slide with the 4 different species that you were comparing early on. What was it about 2019 that made it so good? Do we know?
I don't know, actually.
The weather.
Must have been the weather. It's strange that. Because that was a real bumper year.
It was a peak for every single one of those 4 species, very high.
Just everything seemed to work together.
Somebody said that moths are happy to fly in the rain. I agree with that. They will fly in the rain, but they don't like drizzle. They don't like fog. They don't like mist. They don't like dew either. Somebody I remember saying that they don't mind dampness coming down at them, but they don't like it coming up from underneath, from like dew. I don't know why that should be, but it seems to be borne out by my experience anyway. Any further contributions?
Sorry, that's Stephen Hath here from Lincolnshire, but also I'm the regional coordinator for Warwickshire and Worcestershire, where I used to live. One comment that I'd have in terms of the moth numbers is that certainly in my garden, it was predominantly the noctuid moths, where I saw a big drop off in numbers. There were probably only about 40% as many as I would normally record in an average year. whereas most of the other types of moths, it was maybe sort of 10 or 15% down. And actually, even for the micros, I had a couple of species that were quite numerous this last year, and actually they overall numbers were probably slightly up for micros, except perhaps for the sort of tortrixes and the sort of pyralids and grambids. It'd be interesting to know whether other people had found that same sort of pattern, or whether that was just the sort of combination of moths and habitats that I've got around me. I don't know if that's something that you looked at, Evan, or would be able to look at.
Would you look at that?
Yeah, I guess I could have a look at it. Yeah.
In Wales, the one species that increased in considerably over the in 2024 was green carpet. Did anybody else find green carpet did well?
What I found in my garden up in County Durham was a big reduction in large yellow underwings. I don't know if other people felt that.
Well, there's been a big loss there.
Yeah.
That's a big food source for birds as well, of course, and bats. It's a big moss.
In my garden in Aviemore, I normally get more lesser broad-bordered yellow underwing than large yellow underwing, but the numbers of them was very poor last year. Now, Julie Mason in chat has pointed out that the northeast may have been drier, but temperatures were lower. And I think that was something I noticed up here as well. It wasn't just the wetness, it was the fact it was really, really cold at times.
Well, that's true. It was cold in Durham a lot of the time. But I think it was significant, the number. I mean, normally you're looking and you just feel daunted by the number of large yellow underwings, but I didn't feel that last year at any time.
Yeah, they're notable by their absence, weren't they?
It was the same here in West Wales. Large yellow underwings were much reduced.
Just looking through chat again, and Stephen Penny-Relfer said that green carpet did well in East Yorkshire. So, and Anna Nikolenko lives in France now and registered more moth species and numbers in her garden in 2024 than 2023. So it obviously was a kind of UK specific bad weather.
Yeah, in Pembrokeshire, the lesser yellow underwing was one of our it was very scarce last year. Large yellow underwings, we don't get many, but they didn't do too badly. Green carpet, we had possibly a record year. But the species that really dropped, there were just no grass moths, no common. I mean, the micros I know, but we just hardly saw a grass moth at all. You know, the Griffalus species, they were very, very scarce.
We had the same.
Yeah, that's right. Normally they're jumping up in the grass as you walk along.
Yeah.
Nothing this year.
Well, what's very sad is here we have about 180 acres of land that we manage for wildlife, and we don't spray, we don't do anything. We do everything we can to encourage species, and they were well down.
Kevin Hewitt is asking, could the cold, wet weather adversely affect those species like a large yellow underwing which pupate in the soil? So presumably the soil, if it's getting wet, is going to get even colder. So could that have an effect?
Possible.
Something to think about anyway. I think we can. One of the things we can do is to comb through the data and see if we can get some answers of this kind. In Wales, there are two species in particular that have been falling drastically and consistently, and they were the dot moth and the antler moth. They've almost gone down to zero, both of them in 2024.
Yes.
Yeah, we had hardly any.
That's right.
Did we have one? Did we have one?
I don't think so. No.
It's the species we don't catch in our garden at Pembrokeshire anyway. So we see them on the coast, but we don't get them in the garden here.
Oh, the third one was the broom moth.
Which one?
Broom.
Do we have one?
Yes, yes, but not many.
So all three have been dropping consistently, up and down, of course. We have the variation from year to year, but all three have gone down enormously this last few years, and particularly in 2024. And I wonder if it's something that is reflected countrywide.
The answer is yes, but watch this space.
It does. Steve, I think it's about time we moved on. I think we've got a little bit of time in hand, which is good. But if you'd like to give your talk on the state of garden moths from 2008 to 2023. Steve tells me that he's published over 300 published papers ranging across the biomedical spectrum and beyond. He's currently working on trends in obscure kidney diseases, IVF outcomes, and maternity care in the UK and Africa. Steve.
Thank you. Just let's get this screen sorted out so I can actually see some faces, because it's much easier to talk into faces. Okay, this is my trap in the suburban desert of Stockport. Yes. So the introduction on the website says the purpose of the garden moth scheme is to try and find out what is happening to our common garden moths. And of course, most of the analysis that's been done on them so far has been looking at across gardens, looking at various side issues compared to the main aim, as it says, as stated here, which is to see what's happening in terms of trends, changes in our common moths. And here's some very common moths, of course. I did get some yellow underwings last year, but not as many as previous years. I was talked, it's now realised that we've now got around about, I think, 16 good years of data. So it is really time that we can actually start looking properly at long-term trends, which is what the scheme was designed to do way back when. And so in collaboration with various other people, we're starting to look at that in a sort of systematic scientific way. So I've been doing this game for about 10 years now. I think it's my 10th season, and I'm a biostatistician at the University of Manchester, so that's what I do. And if you want to catch hold of me and comment on anything, my email is down there. And I think this is my favourite moth, and it didn't turn up last night. And I'll put my thank yous in first, because you always run out of time at the end, don't you? And get swamped. So first of all, of course, to thank all you lot who've provided the data for this, and Audrey, who's pulled it all together, and the various other people around around these screens. I probably missed some out who've actually helped answering questions and providing bits and pieces of stuff that we needed. I'm supposed to be working with some of the butterfly conservation people, with George Tordoff, to pull all this together in a kind of scientific way and work out and to get some their expertise in. But I really want the expertise for the people who know the data, who are in this room now, and also to acknowledge Colin at who did all the analysis for the big moth atlases and the butterfly atlas. I think the moth atlases and the state of moth reports, which and he's kindly provided data and some useful comments as well. Right, so I'll just talk a little bit about what we have with the data and what questions we can ask. I put in some slides about the methods, but I'll probably skip over those because you don't really want to know detailed statistics. You just want to know I presume what you want to see is what actually the answers were. So now we'll talk about the abundance trends as we have them now, and then do a little bit of work we did comparing the abundance trends in GMS with the wider countryside things, which was reported in the moth atlases and so on, and then some summaries. Okay, the data. We've had a lot of data. I think it's always worth saying this: over 2 million records for 1,000 different gardens over the 16 years. I should say this doesn't include last year because that data hasn't actually come out of the Audrey's processing system yet. So it is up to 2023, and 1,300 traps. We talk about traps rather than gardens because if somebody changes from that little quiet actinic thing to a great big mercury vapor bulb, you're going to get a big change in trend. It's going to look like you've suddenly got lots more moths. So we actually analyse at the level of the trap. We analyse traps, not moths, so not gardens, because it's just to get rid of that lump, that possible jump when people change traps. So nearly 8 million moths have been recorded, so about 5,000 seasons worth of moths, and 180,000 nights, and nearly 15,000 disappointments, empty traps, and very good coverage. We've only got 6% of the time missed when people didn't actually record overall. And of those 7 million moths, nearly 1 million of them were large yellow underwings. So this just by way of background, this is the garden moth scheme. It went national nominally in 2007 from the pilots in the West Midlands, but really it was 2008 before we got proper national coverage, and I think it's Ireland and the Channel Islands joined in 2009. We've had a very nice, consistent methodology. The way it was set up, that's stayed the same, and this is, of course, exactly what we want in order to look at what's happening over time. What has changed over time is the number of species that we record. In the early days, people were very conservative about what we thought people could identify. And then as the years have gone on, we've added more and more moths, and more species to those lists. And in 2015, we started with the core list plus the regional list, which you probably remember. And it's going to change again this year, which I think has already been communicated. Anyway, we'll talk about that's for later. But if we go right back to 2008, there were about 70 species that have been recorded everywhere consistently for all that time, which we can look at in a systematic way, and 193 from 2010, which is and that's the series. That's the set I'm going to present on, which are those moths have been covered in all the regions to have national coverage for nearly all the period. And the numbers of moth species increasing. In a few more years, we'll have enough data to look at more moths. But these increases here, we haven't really got a very long series yet, so we're still waiting for that data to mature. This plot here is an awful lot of work from a lot of people chasing up and getting to me copies of all the recording forms so that we knew exactly what had been looked at. Because of course you need to know what was not recorded as well as what it was recorded. But I'm still missing. There's still a few forms for 2007 and the 2009 Channel Islands form we haven't found. So if anyone even go back to 2007 in Scotland, the North East, East of England or Southwest England, and have a copy of the recording form lying on a hard drive somewhere, we would appreciate it. So we're running on most of the years. It's built up from the early years, but around the 350 traps. That's a lot of traps been running. It's dropped off in the last couple of years. I'm not sure where it is now. And very good national coverage. Now, these dots are actually longitude and latitude dots. These are actually in the right place. And that I say that because it's hard work to get that, because we've got the English grid, the Irish grid, and the Channel Islands grid, national grids, which have the grid references from, are all different. So that's got a lot of effort just to get those grids sorted out. But we're going to have although it's not, it is patchy, that's not bad. It's actually a pretty good representation of where gardens are, of course. And since a garden moth scheme, that doesn't seem unreasonable. With very variable numbers of moths does each of us catch. From some of us down here, which only get a couple of hundred moths within the scheme. There's other moths outside the scheme, of course. And this is based on the lists the common lists. We have some down here, only a couple of hundred moths a year, and some people up here who get thousands, and a lot more work to identify them all, of course. I'm down here, so this is where I am. And we have a range of people. Quite a lot of traps here, which have only got 1 year's worth of data, so don't tell us much about trends. Of course, some of those are the first year. We met they will be bringing more, and some of the people I just tried it for a year and didn't stick. But we have 10 traps there, which you recorded all 16 years, and that's so congratulations to those 10. I'm sure you know who you are. I've only been doing it for 9 at the moment, 10 this year. And of course, if we're looking for overall trends and what's happening, the long series are the ones that are really very valuable. Although we can use all the data, even 1 year, we can use the value and the power from this comes from these people who have been doing it for several years or even longer. So from that data, we can ask questions about where the moths are, the distributions. That's not really what we're designed for, but we can have a look. When we get data on the flight periods, and what we're really interested in is the numbers, how many moths were recorded and what the trends are, whether we're doing well or not doing well, and the changes over time. So we're mainly interested in numbers. We have a look at flight periods. It turns out we haven't got enough data yet, enough power there to really see differences in flight periods. Although there's some evidence out there that some of the moths are getting earlier or later, we haven't actually got our data on its own isn't very informative yet, but will be. Methods, right. There are quite a lot. I'm not going to talk through these slides in any detail. The big problem that we have with the GMS data is that you have to actually we know what's there. You've got all the data. What's there is working out what wasn't there because of these changes in the recording forms and various other things, little quirks in there. It's not always easy to say if the moth wasn't there, was it one that you would have recorded? And we can talk about that, but I'm not going to go through that now because it's tedious. And to say this is amazingly good data. I work with some very big, professionally curated data registries and large data sets from the NHS and so on. This is far better in terms of data quality. And the analysis, I will just say here, the bit in red, the rest of the details are there if anybody wants to know them, because there's a big document if you want to see it. You can ask me and I'll send it you. But basically we use a variation of the same approach that's used for the butterfly and moth atlases from the transect data and from the Rothamsted data that we're using. It's basically the same approach as was used there to estimate the trends over time. And I show you this picture just to frighten you. This is not one I expect you to read. This is the data analysis, my sort of schematic of what the process is. This is really there for three reasons. Firstly, just to show you, to make the point that it is complicated. There's a lot of code in here. This is not trivial stuff to do. Secondly, to say all this stuff, all the analysis is coded using open source software, which is publicly available. So all this can be reproduced and it can be available to other people. And there's a lot of intermediate data sets in there which could be of use to other people. And at some stage we'll document that and for other analyses. And perhaps results. So we get plots of distance, we get plots of where the moths are. The nice thing about GMS data is we get the open circles as where the moths weren't, as well as the closed circles, the red circles, which show where the moths were. So that's good, but of course the coverage isn't great, and the traps that we're looking at vary from year to year as different people come in and out of the scheme. So it's quite difficult to get good abundance distribution data. But you can see in this particular example, canary-shouldered thorn, there is an indication here that this is one of the moths that may be increasing in its range, certainly from the early years. These are distributions for 3 different time periods. The other nice thing that we can do with the GMS data, which you can't do with a lot of the data, is we actually know how hard you looked. So we actually know. So we can put a red dot here for not just it was seen, but it was seen on average once a year in a trap. So it was really seen. It wasn't just one that wandered through and got lost. So we can actually sort of just define present and in a quantitative way rather than just somebody saw one once somewhere. But that's not really what we're about. This is more what we're about. So these are 2 examples of this is the sort of thing that come out. I've got a nice document here with a draft with all 170, 180 different species analysed. So we get a plot of the flight period for each year, so you can see where flight periods are changing and how they vary. And this scalloped oak has got quite a consistent flight period. 1 year there might have been a bit late, that might be a bit early. And then we get plots of the trend. So we get individual estimates of each year. So you can see the good and bad years. And we see there's an overall trend. And this one is showing an overall significant decrease for the ones not doing very well, losing about 4% a year. You'll notice the examples are the ones that I'm going to show you are the ones that I get. So I've got pictures of them. So if I don't show your favourite moth, it's because I don't get it in my garden. The blood vein is one of these double brooded things, moths, and it seems to be very variable in year to year about exactly when it comes out and how the distribution between you do 2 different broods and so on. So it's quite a complicated phenology. But again, good and bad years. And in this case, an increasing trend, again, around about 4% a year happens. So this is one of the moths that's doing reasonably well at the moment in the last 16 years. Possibly excluding last year, of course, given the previous talk. If we look at the total moths per trap, so this is basically the total number of moths we're getting. It varies from year to year, the good and bad years, but actually, overall, the trend is totally flat. Over the 16 years that we're analysing here, in total moth terms, there is virtually no change. There's good and bad years, and last year was a bad one. However, if we do the simple thing to do, which is to just look at the number of moths per trap over time, and plot a line through that, it looks like that is a significant and big decrease. Now, what's happening here is that in the later years here, we've got more people like me who are running traps in gardens that don't do as well, that don't have as many moths. So this there's an inbuilt in the GMS. There's an inbuilt pessimism going on here. There's actually because we're getting people in smaller gardens or less good gardens in the later years, it looks like things are going a bit worse than they actually are. So this is a source analysis. It's interesting, but we shouldn't really be doing it. There's moss in the outcome. So if you look overall, half the moths are showing an increase in abundance and half the species are showing a decrease. So it is actually overall, no real change is actually made up of species that are going down. 54 species are increasing and 46 species are decreasing on that. I plotted these by macro and micro. The macro moths are shown here. I've marked those that are called statistically significant if anybody's interested in that. But we're getting changes. Most moths are changing by a few percent a year, fairly small trends, but there are changes. With one or two down here, we saw 10%, 20% changes. So there are some having real differences, looking like really quite big differences, as well as being detectably significant differences. The micro moths we've got in here all seem to be increasing, which is slightly odd. But partly this is, of course, some of the things in there. This one here is one I can't pronounce the Latin name, but the English name is the ruddy streak, which is one of these little Australian addentive species, which is spreading spreading a lot over recent years, and that's known. But I suspect a lot of the micro moths differences are due to the fact that we can now identify them when we didn't used to be able to. So we're probably getting much better at picking them up and bothering to see them in our traps. Because this book, before 2012, it was very difficult to identify micros. You only had the pin specimens or various other resident experts you had to find. Now since then we stand a chance. So I don't really believe yet that all the changes in micros that we're seeing are actually real, as opposed to changes in possibly getting better at doing things with them. Certainly, I couldn't identify these till this book came along, and the first day that book came, I had one of these on my front door. It was nice. So that was always called the cover girl. I can't pronounce the Latin name. So here's some of the winners and losers. These are basically the top 10, 15, isn't it? As was mentioned earlier, dot moth is going down a lot. That's decreasing rapidly everywhere, it seems. That was mentioned earlier, wasn't it? There was mentioned broom moth, wasn't it? It was mentioned earlier as one that's decreasing. People have noted the decrease. This one depresses me. The Marble Beauty was one of those that got me into mothing because I kept finding them on our front door. And that one's going down, and so on. Garden Tiger, which is because of one of the charismatic, one of those charismatic ones that you use to encourage people to take moths, to get interested in moths, is also one of the ones that are decreasing. Increasing. I had my first lunar underwing last year, so that's coming up, and what we got? Wainscote, dingy footman, which are quite more not easy to identify moths, aren't they? And double striped pug is interesting because I had two double striped pugs in my trap this morning, which is very early. But we've had a look, and that's not easy just all the whole winners and losers. At the moment, we're not coming up with any particular traits that distinguish those that are doing well and those that aren't. So if anybody has ideas, the things that you might look at that might explain this, we'd be interested to know. So here's a winner. Here's a lunar underwing. They're very, very tight flight period. Seems to stay quite very consistent, and is showing this very nice increase over time, with not a lot of year-to-year variability. And one of the ones that's not doing as well, the clouded bordered brindle, which is going down about 8% a year. Quite a steep decline there. And these, looking at those plots, that's fairly. You don't need a statistical test to show that they're going down, but you can see it, and the statistical tests show that they are as well, of course. There's been two very public reports about the state of moths. There's the big moth atlas, and that was updated in 2021. It's now being updated in up to 2022, which Colin has sent me the data, and I've got the data for that. So that's not yet published, but will be soon. And this data is based on the Rothamsted insect survey, which is a national network of standard traps. Great big things here. The great big things run automatically with a 200-watt tungsten bulb. It's not one that appears in. I don't think that appears in your. You've got one of those in yours, have you, Reuben? 200-watt tungsten bulb. Because they've only been since 1968, so they're based on what they kept the same traps as they could use, as what was available then, and they kept the same ones. So it is actually the longest series in the world. Currently, there's about 60 traps running in the last year. I think the average is about 90, it said. So we're much bigger, but we don't have the same long series. But we are much bigger than that. And so that's where these results have been reported. So we can look at what we see compared with what is seen in those atlases, which are the atlases that are very depressing. I need to turn that plot upside down, inside out. And probably they're reporting, so 2/3 of moths are decreasing. They're reporting a overall decrease in moth numbers, which we don't see, and only 1/3 were increasing, compared to our data where we're seeing about half and half decreasing and increasing. And if you plot the Rothamsted, the long-term data, the trends in percent per year here against the short-term trends that we're seeing in GMS, there's virtually no correlation. They look quite different. Which you thought means, are our gardens different from the wider countryside? Are we doing something different? The answer is actually no. This is the silver Y, which of course is a ubiquitous immigrant. So you'd expect to be the same in the gardens as well as in the wider countryside, because it's just where they land. And the trends between our data and the Rothamsted traps are practically identical. That is an amazingly good correlation. Those two species, the two methods, which is nice from our point of view, because despite the fact that we're all using different traps, all using lots of different observers, we're getting very consistent data with what is being seen by these kind of professional so-called traps. Little story. This is the kind of the exception actually, rather than the rule. Blair's shoulder knot. Oops. This is one of those moths that's increased historically from the sort of 70s onwards. And the long-term trends were very much an increase. We're seeing, on the GMS data, we're seeing a big decrease, and that actually is also in the Rothamsted data, although they don't actually pick this out because they only actually look at the long-term trends. They don't look at this later period, because this is one of the moths that is reported to be sort of spread because of the mass planting of these Leylandii hedges, because that's what one of the food plants is those that group of conifers. And we've now realised, lots of people have realised these leylandii hedges are not a good idea. And a lot of people have chopped them down. So it could very well be, we've got a very nice story here, where this is actually is actually a reflection of the distribution of hedges. But maybe that's a bit slightly speculative, but interesting thought. But this is a good, this is a more typical example. This is the flounced rustic. One of the nice things about talking to moth people is you don't have to find the prettiest moths. You just find the moths that are actually interesting. You don't have to find all the colourful ones. Like when you're talking to non-moth audiences and trying to encourage them to be interested. The flounced rustic on the atlas will tell you has been decreasing significantly over the last 50 years, and is a bad news story. Our data is showing a big increase in abundance over this last 16 years, which actually is also seen in the Rothamsted data, but they didn't notice it. And it is now actually the present levels. If this continues, and of course next year we'll probably not show it because it was a bad year, it's getting close to what it was at historic levels. So and this is actually happening in quite a lot of the moths, that we're seeing the long-term trends were declining, and that's very much what we're reporting, and what we'll, give your money to butterfly conservation stuff. But there seems to be there is buried in there. There seems to be there is a bit of a good news story emerging, which is some of these things are either stabilizing or recovering to some extent, to a greater or lesser extent, that were doing very badly. And of course, what happened in the sort of 90s, 2000s, you start to get the effects of all the agricultural set-aside schemes and the environmental stewardship schemes and so on. And maybe there's a story here that's somewhere in there, and so we need to pick it out and work with the Rothamsted people on this, that these schemes have worked to at least some extent, and that maybe there's a good news story here. So what a way of selling the story of encouraging good practice and what do things that are good for moths in a slightly more positive way than just a doom and gloom. But anyway, what you'll note here is, yes, there's a suggestion in this one of a sort of periodicity that kind of it seems to cycle up and down, up and down, up and down, which is kind of reminiscent of the holly blue butterfly, which has this 7-year something cycle of good years and bad years, driven by the numbers of parasites that build up and then suppress the number of moths, and then there's no moths to the parasites, so the parasites die out and the moths come back. And there's several species that do this. Not many, but there's several species that have this kind of seems to have a periodicity in there. And this is one. And if you've got a periodicity of about 8 years or something, so you're getting cycles over about 8 years, our 16-year period starts to look quite short, because it's not really 16 years, it's 2 cycles. And so we may have to wait for things like this, which are showing that sort of trend. We may have to wait another decade before we really know whether this was real or not. And if you plot the short-term trends from the GMS and the Rothamsted data, we see a very good correlation. And this actually this is not very different. This just looks like noise. There's very little difference in the trend. This is the short-term trends, our 16-year trends against the 15 years of the Rothamsted trends over the same period. And by and large, we're getting very, very similar results, which is very nice in the sense that it confirms both sets of data are actually validating each other. There are a few things which I've highlighted where there does seem to be possibly differences, and I've listed them there. The ones in bold are the ones that might possibly be real. There's not much that the statistician would say it's probably all chance. We certainly can't be certain that any of this is real, but these differences. But there's a couple that were slightly intriguing anyway, to me. And the elephant hawk moth is very, very flat in the wider countryside over the whole period and the last few years as well in the Rothamsted data, but seems to be increasing in our gardens. And the small dusty wave is another one which seems to be increasing faster in gardens than elsewhere. But the elephant hawk moth is interesting because, of course, we've all been getting lots of free offers of Nicotiana seeds to plant in our gardens to attract hawk moths. So maybe it's working, and we're getting more and more hawk moths in our gardens. But who knows? That's speculative. I've no speculation at all for why the small dusty wave should be doing slightly better in gardens than it is further up elsewhere. And I'm running out of time. So in summary, we do now have enough data to look at trends, which is nice, and there's more species to come, but not enough data to identify flight period changes. Oops. Half are increasing, half are decreasing, and we've not found any common features, and very similar trends with the two series. And that maybe we're seeing the signs of some species stabilizing or even recovering from the losses that were over the 50 years that we've been reporting. And where's this going? I have a draft of a page that summarizes the results of each of the 170 moths for those that are interested at the species, any particular interest in species. That's a draft which a few people here have got to review and will be finalised sometime. So hopefully we'll end up with public reports with all the species accounts and some summary data, some summaries which you can all look at your leisure. I suppose we're hoping to work with butterfly conservation people on the scientific publication and hoping to make the resources that we've generated here available more widely. I would like some more input on what this all says. Anybody else that knows their moths better can give us any ideas about what else we can pull out of this set of trends. I haven't yet looked at the winter scheme, but that's on my to-do list. And there's a 2024 data we might add in now, or we might leave later. And there's other things I'd like to do. But more to the point, I think it's time for some questions. If anybody has any questions, and I think I've just about used my time up, haven't I? Yes. Thank you. Oh, thank you to particularly the people here.
Thank you, Steve. That was very interesting. I'm just looking at time. It's just 11 o'clock. I suggest that people may well have quite a lot of questions. Could they write the questions and put them in the chat box? And probably we'll have a look at them when we get at the end. I suggest.
And if anybody has got comments or wants to talk about it more, I would appreciate a few more interactions with people. That's how I work. My email is there.
Yeah,
contact me as well, please.
I suggest we have a little break now, just a 5-minute break, a comfort break, and we'll come back to Reuben telling us which moth trap is best in 5 minutes' time. Is that okay?
I'm sharing on.
Speaker is Reuben O'Connell Booth, who's a Master's Bioresearch student at the University of Leeds, working on insect declines and insect conservation policy. And you're going to tell us about which moth trap is best.
Sure. I'll just share my screen quick. Oops. Can you guys see the screen?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, car starting right outside the door conveniently when I'm starting. Yeah, so hi everyone, it's nice to meet you all. So I'm Reuben. I'm a Masters by Research student at Leeds, and this project was about comparing moth traps, and it was my undergraduate dissertation. So my first ever paper. Can't compete with Steve's 300, but we hopefully yeah. So. I will just firstly give a bit of background to my work and my supervisor, Bill Coonan's work, in terms of questions about insect declines. And then I'll talk about how national statistics work in terms of monitoring insect population trends, previous work on comparing moth traps, and then I'll talk about the methods very briefly again, and then some results and some conclusions, and then any questions. So just to start off with, if you'd like to read the paper, it's out in preprint at the moment, and it's just under review at Royal Entomological Society journal. So it should hopefully, fingers crossed, come out soon. So just for a bit of background, this is sort of the background to my undergrad work and my master's work and the PhD work I'm doing next year, and sort of the group that I'm in at Leeds. So just talk briefly about the review paper that I have on screen here was a really a big, what they call a meta-analysis of lots of different insect time series data sets, so tracking insects through time. And what the authors tried to do was use a set of search terms to search the scientific literature to find these insect data sets and then collate them all together and come out with one number at the end. And when they did this big comparison, they came out with some really scary figures. So what they ended up doing was combining lots of insect time series data sets, and they found over 40% of insects species are under threat, and that insects are declining in biomass across the globe by 2.5% per year. So this is something that was really widely cited. And really, so it's got about 5,000 citations so far, which is absolutely insane number of citations since 2019. And it was reported by The Guardian. And there was some discussion about Insectageddon and lots of discussion around this. Now, the reason why I brought this up is because something interesting happened right after this paper came out, which is that scientists started to reply to the paper and look at the methods that they used to search the scientific literature. And they found something interesting, which is that when they were searching for the time series data sets, what they actually found was they'd included the word decline in their meta-analysis search terms. I can see Steve's laughing. So the error is so obvious that you're not going to get any increasing data sets if you're searching for decline data sets. And so it's biased, and lots of people reacted against this. What happened that was interesting after this was lots of groups came out with their own analyses of insect time series data sets and looking at insect abundance trends. And we're talking about a particular metric, not for one species individually, or for the number of species even, but for the total number of insects independent of species. So insect biomass or insect total abundance, and this is its own sort of metric. And so some interesting papers came out, and there's lots of discussion about what can we actually say about insect declines? How much do we actually know about how insects are doing in aggregate? And the outcome that came out of this discussion is I've put a couple of papers here just to show a bit of a contrast. So the one on the left is from the Rothamsted Insect Survey that Steve mentioned. So the light trap network with the 200-watt tungsten filament bulbs, and we see sort of an increase from 1970 to the 1980s, and then maybe a slight decrease from then to now, but quite stochastic patterns. And then in contrast, there was another survey done in protected areas in Germany, which showed with malaise traps, so not moths, but lots of different insect species that showed a massive decline. So the consensus was that this paper that I mentioned at the start had sort of really misrepresented the literature, and it was making sort of unfounded conclusions. And the actual patterns are, it really varies where you are, whether insects are dramatically declining or not. It really depends on the history of the area, Has it already been defaunated, or is it diverse before agricultural expansion or some other driver? Basically, we don't really know what is happening to insects on aggregate. We know there's lots of reasons to be worried. We know lots of insect species have declined and decreased in distribution, etc., etc. But we don't know the magnitude of the general trend of insect populations. And this is a really important metric, as you can imagine, for looking at achieving biodiversity targets and for evaluating the efficacy of agri-environment schemes, as Steve mentioned, and lots of other things like that. And so how drastic does our action need to be? How worried should we be, etc., etc. Yeah. So for the purposes of looking at how insects are doing in general, we use biodiversity indicators, or the government uses biodiversity indicators. And these are some subset of species which are supposed to represent the abundance and diversity of insect species in general. And this is because lots of insect species, particularly like small diptera, aphids, or something like this, perhaps some micromoths, you need a PhD, from the Natural History Museum to work out what even family you're looking at, and it's impossible to identify them, and various things like this. Or they're very small, very cryptic, they're not found easily, and it's very hard to monitor their population trends. So we use species which are easier to monitor, so butterflies and moths, particularly butterflies, to make inferences about the wider insect community. So yeah, and it's really important that if we're expecting species to be representative of insects more generally, that they actually are, and that we have good reason to think that. So in terms of which indices we have at government level for insects, we have 4 butterfly abundance indices. These are made by Butterfly Conservation using the UK BMS data. So this is citizen science data, UK Butterfly Monitoring Scheme. People do transects, pollard walks, and record the number of species and send their data off. And these are used to generate 4 different indices describing insect population trends. Moths, on the other hand, make less of a contribution to a national level indication. So the Rothamsted Insect Survey, so the standardized data set with the 200-watt tungsten bulbs, contributes, I believe, only to this all species abundance index. Another important source of data, apart from sort of DEFRA produced national indices, is these state of nature reports, and particularly the ones that are produced by Butterfly Conservation, that are really important for looking at important for policy making, basically. So National Moth Recording Scheme contributes to these, but only in a sort of occurrence-only fashion. So essentially, if a volunteer catches a moth, that counts as a 1. If a volunteer catches 2 moths, that also counts as a 1, or 100 moths, and that's also a 1. And it just means that the moth has been found in that location. So this is a really sort of a clever way developed by some really clever people. So Emily Dennis and Richard Fox at Butterfly Conservation, for looking at what's happening to moths with data which is not standardized. Yeah. And that's different to sort of an abundance analysis like how Steve has been doing, or how you can do with the Rothamsted Insect Survey data. Yeah, so we can see that moths play a much more limited role in terms of biodiversity indication with respect to butterflies. I believe that, and I think people may agree with me, there's a lot of advantages that moths present over butterflies for biodiversity indication purposes. So I did a big comparison in the paper of, am I running over dramatically? Sorry, I'll speed up. So cost effective, abundant, readily identified, much more diverse than butterflies. It's easy to, they represent critical components of insect populations and various other factors, but essentially compared to butterflies, much easier to sample in large numbers, much more diverse and much more abundant, which suggests that they would be more representative of insect populations more generally. So we've discussed this Rothamsted Insect Survey data. And the question that I was trying to look at with relation to the insect survey data was, can we sort of integrate the GMS data into the Rothamsted insect data. And I was really heartened by Steve's results that he's just shown now. We're showing that the trends are quite parallel between the Rothamsted and the garden moth scheme data, which is a really good thing to see. So the goals of the paper, aside from just this background in getting more insect data, looking for more insect data to describe insect population trends, because we're unsure about the trend in general, I was also trying to look at making a comparison for picking a moth trap if you want to pick one for your garden, for your study. And I wanted to test how the brightness and how the spectrum of the bulb affects the species that you catch, with a view to looking at like potential biases, and if you were to include garden moth scheme data into a wider surveying, or to look at whether you might want to get several types of trap for your garden or for your study, and just to see how it affects your sampling. One of the key things was this mobility hypothesis. So the moths that are there are spindle ermine moths, and they gather together in these big social groups. And what a group of researchers did was collected a big social group and let them pupate and grow, and found that when they did this across lots of different social groups, they found across a gradient of light pollution, the ones in the light polluted area had evolved to be smaller. And this suggests that light pollution is having an evolutionary pressure on moths in terms of their flight. So it's thought that they evolved to be smaller so that they are less mobile, so that they're less affected by artificial light at night, is the idea, the mobility hypothesis. I'll just quickly move on to the actual results. So here are the methods. So the covariates that we used here were rainfall, temperature, moonlight, and phenology. And these are some nice smoothed plots showing how we modeled each of these effect on moth trap catch. So you can see temperature increases catch. Rainfall, zero rain has a good positive effect on moth trap catch. And then from then on, maybe a slight negative trend. Obviously, it's quite rare to get 60 millimeters cubed of rainfall over a night. So these are less well represented in the data sets, which is why it's more sort of wiggly. And we can see the peak of moth abundance and generally negatively affected by moonlight. Yeah. So in terms of how different moth traps compare to each other, this is the plot from the paper. I've blown it up a little bit, so unfortunately it's a little bit blurry. But we can see that in general, the number of moths that you can catch is affected by the wattage of the trap, its brightness. But it doesn't always follow the sort of wattage to increase catch pattern that you might expect. So if you notice in the middle, 15-watt actinic traps actually were modeled to perform better than 80-watt mercury vapor traps, actinic 40-watt traps, and actinic 20-watt traps, which is unexpected. And yeah, so we suspected this might be something to do with the battery power of these traps, since you can put them in a more favorable position in your garden, perhaps further away from other lights which are powered by the mains. So perhaps it suffers less from light competition. So yeah, and what is hoped sort of with these numbers, maybe you could statistically adjust up the total number of moths caught essentially in a model, and you have a covariate width of bulb type to sort of adjust abundance numbers between types of trap. So there's also these two plots, which are slightly complicated at first sight, but essentially each one of we're looking at the differences between different types of trap in terms of which species that you actually catch. So each red cross is a species. Essentially, any two red crosses that are close to each other, the closer two red crosses are, the more likely they are to be found together in a trap. So if two red crosses are really far apart, they don't tend to co-occur together. So essentially what you do is you represent all of the species in 2D space and fit them to these axes on RDA, called RDA. And then what you can do is regress the effect of, so you correlate the effect of traits on the position that each species take here. So essentially what we found was that size, the species size, was really strongly related to the brightness of the trap in terms of its actinic wattage. So 60-watt actinic traps tended to collect more large species than the lower wattage actinic traps, the dimmer traps. And we thought this was some evidence for the mobility hypothesis, whereby larger moth species are more mobile, they can fly higher, they're dispersing more effectively, so they're more likely to sort of encounter a light, and they're more likely to see the light and then eventually reach it to the trap. Conversely, it suggests that if you're using a 6-watt actinic trap or a similar dim trap, you're very likely to more sample the sort of more local area. So the smaller moth species that are just in the sort of in your garden or in the sort of small area around. Yeah. And just briefly related to that, the other plot on the right-hand side shows that the size of the moth was also related to distance to street lighting. So the further away your garden was from street lighting, then the larger the moths you caught were. Yeah, so I believe that I've run over a bit.
It's okay, Reuben, keep going.
Yeah, sorry. So in terms of conclusions, found that, I'm sorry, I've just put the picture in front of me. So actinic traps are a really good choice. They often perform better than higher wattage traps. I've mentioned about the favorable position of the garden. But different bulbs essentially collect different moths. And this had sort of been hinted at with some other sort of experiments in the literature. But it's actually really hard to tell with a field experiment if you're running 2 moth traps. If you imagine you've got one with a green light and one with a blue light, or one with a red light and one with a green light. Lots of experiments like this have been run, and they actually don't tend to find big differences between different types of moth traps. They tend to find that the actual position of the moth trap, say it's in a field or wherever, the position of the moth trap has a massive effect on it compared to the light color, which has a relatively small effect on it. And I guess the thing that's tricky to find out is, how much of this effect is to do with where the moth trap was and how much of the effect was to do with the color of the light. And this makes it a really big logistical challenge anyway to work out the differences in a field comparison. So we did demonstrate it here with garden moth scheme data, which is something that was really useful about this data set. Yeah, so street lighting appears to affect larger species more dramatically. Yeah. So total moth abundance can, in principle, be statistically controlled for, perhaps in a big model. And GMS data is useful for moth abundance indication, as Steve has demonstrated even more strongly with his analysis. And yeah, I will leave it there. And if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Reuben. I think we are running a little bit behind time. So again, if people would like to jot down their questions for Reuben on the chat, then we can deal with them at the end. So I think we'd better rush off fairly quickly because we're about 10 minutes behind, but that's okay. See, Martin's joined us, which is good. So next talk is by Martin Harvey on demonstration of importing GMS record, developments in iRecord. And Martin is an etymologist and biological recorder based at the UK CEH Biological Record Centre. His main areas of work include support for the iRecord online recording system and liaison with national recording schemes. Over to you, Martin.
Okay, thanks, Norman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, fine.
Yeah, great. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't join at the beginning of the meeting, but yeah, good to hear Reuben's talk just now, and I heard the end of Steve's. Yeah, thanks for inviting me to come and talk to the conference this morning. So Norman's asked me to say a little bit about iRecord and how that is being used for moth recording, which is what I'm going to do. And I think we should probably start off by just saying a little bit about what iRecord is and why it was developed. I think most people have probably heard of its existence by now. But basically, iRecord is a set of tools that can be used to enable online recording of one sort or another. So that can be done via websites or via various apps. And the software that underlines iRecord has actually been used now for a lot of different projects, and everything that we're seeing on the screen here at the moment is a recording project that has been set up using the iRecord software in the background to enable these things to happen. And one of the things that allows, and one of the reasons that iRecord was developed in the first place, is that it allows all these very different starting points to put their data into one big data warehouse, which we refer to as the Indicia data warehouse. Indicia is the name of the software that sits behind all of this. And when iRecord was first being developed, which takes us back to about 2010, one of the reasons for developing these set of software tools was the recognition that online recording was becoming a very much a growing thing at the time. It was obviously something that lots of people wanted to do. And there was a danger that we could end up with lots and lots of different systems, lots of websites all collecting their own pots of data, which would then be quite hard to bring back together and make available to the recording schemes. So the idea of this is that we can still have lots of different websites and lots of different apps, but if they all feed their data into this one place, it makes it much easier to make that data available to the people who do the verification of the records and to the recording schemes and the other places that need to use the data. As you might expect, since it was about 2012 when iRecord was first launched, and since then the number of people using it has increased, and over the recent years we've had over 20,000 users active each year. Lots and lots of activity, lots of records coming in, and really the whole sort of purpose of this is so that somebody can be out in the field and seeing wildlife and getting their record into the system, hopefully reasonably quickly and easily via the websites and apps. Some of you may be aware that we also now have a link with the iNaturalist system, which is another independent online platform that's actually based in the United States but is used all around the world. And records from iNaturalist are now brought into iRecord to enable them to be seen alongside the other ones as well. And there's also a link with BirdTrack, and you may not know that the BirdTrack system, which primarily does lots and lots of bird recording, does also collect data on some other species groups nowadays, not moths at the moment, but there is some butterfly data, and basically any non-bird records end up in BirdTrack, also come into iRecord. And once they're in iRecord, as soon as they appear in iRecord, they are immediately available to the national recording schemes and to the county recorders who work with those national schemes. And it's those people and the volunteers that work with them who do the checking of the records and the verification and making sure that the records are being sort of correctly identified and correctly recorded. At the same time, the records become available to the relevant local record centres. As soon as they arrive in the system, the local record centres are able to see and download those records. If the record applies to a piece of land that is managed by one of these organisations, Woodland Trust, National Trust and RSPB at the moment are three other groups who do take records for their locations, they're able to access them in iRecord. And another piece of the jigsaw is the data flow up to the National Biodiversity Network Atlas platform, which for a lot of recording schemes is done on a pretty automatic basis. As soon as the records are checked, they can go straight up to NBN Atlas. That doesn't apply to moths though, because the procedure for moth records is always for them to go to the county recorders first, and for the county recorders to then pass them on to the National Moth Recording Scheme and Butterfly Conservation nationally, and they then get sent to NBN Atlas via Butterfly Conservation. So that link is not automatic for moth records, but it is for quite a lot of others. So the idea, as I say, is that the recorder in the field can put their record in, and it potentially at least can very quickly flow through all these steps and end up being made available to the people who need to use the records. So what's actually happening with moth records on iRecord? This is as of 2 or 3 days ago when I last looked. We had nearly 4 million moth records of over 2,000 species, with a pretty wide coverage across the UK. And 85% of those records have been verified, which represents a huge amount of work by the volunteer verifiers across the country. And Butterfly Conservation have put a lot of effort into supporting people and running training courses to try and get new verifiers on board. But of course, the county moth recorders have also been playing a very big role in keeping that activity on track. I don't think it will be any surprise to any of you that the most frequently recorded moth species on iRecord is large yellow underwing, which of course can turn up in traps in very large numbers, and we do get lots and lots of records of those. The other ones in the sort of most recorded list, so outside the noctuids, the brimstone moth is the most recorded geometer moth. The cinnabar is the most recorded day-flying moth, both as an adult and as a caterpillar, as shown here. And the light brown apple moth, Epiphyes posfitana, is the most recorded micromoth, which again probably won't be a surprise to anyone. Just to briefly mention, because with the talk after me, I think Mike is going to take us through how the spreadsheet import process actually works. But last year we were able to upgrade the spreadsheet import process and try and get that working a little bit more effectively. But I won't say any more about that now, because as I say, Mike's going to cover that in a moment. But that's another way of getting records into the system, of course. And for those of you who aren't involved in the verification side of iRecord, this is just a sort of glimpse of what the verifiers actually see. If you are a verifier within iRecord, you get a separate sort of menu with a way of looking at the records there. And basically, you get this spreadsheet type list on the left-hand side of the screen here. If there is a photo with the record, the photos can be seen and can be opened up to their full size. The record appears on the map, and you can look at the record in comparison to other records of the same species, and all the record details are available there. And basically what the verifiers have to do is to make a judgment over whether the record is sufficiently correct and sufficiently evidenced to be acceptable to the recording scheme. And that's not quite the same as saying that the verifiers are definitely saying that it's absolutely right or absolutely wrong. It's not always as black and white as that. You have to make a judgment. If there's a photo, of course, that helps a lot. That gives you the evidence there that you can certainly check the identification. But there might still be question marks about whether the grid reference is correct and whether the date's absolutely correct. So verifiers have to sort of juggle all these different aspects and try and work out whether the record is sufficiently clear and sufficiently backed up to be acceptable to come into the recording scheme. And some of you may well have had contact from the verifiers who might query a record from time to time and ask if there's more details or additional photos, etc., etc. And a small proportion of the records, and it is a small proportion, that get rejected, but there are some that the evidence just isn't there to really support the record, particularly if it's a rare species or something that's at an unusual location or unusual time of year. So if you are putting records into iRecord, some things that you can do to help with the verification process and help the verifiers are, if you have found something unusual because it is rare or at a funny time of year, then providing a photo is really, really good in those circumstances, and any extra information you can add into the comments to say how you check the identification and that you are aware that it's at an unusual time of year, for instance. That's all very helpful. It is helpful if you can provide your full name as a recorder name, and I know there are some cases where people don't want to do that on a public website, and that's very understandable. But if you are happy doing that, it does help the verifiers know who they're communicating with. And obviously having a pretty good grid reference is useful. And making sure that you complete the stage term to say whether you're dealing with an adult moth or a larva or something else, that's really helpful as well. And if you've got any doubt about what's needed for a particular record, then yeah, contact your county recorder and check what they need. Another aspect within iRecord is there's a section called activities, which is really just a way of filtering records into particular geographical areas or particular species groups and providing a bit of feedback to recorders as to what everything is adding up for. I have the privilege of being the county moth recorder for Berkshire, and as you might expect, we have a Berkshire moth activity set up within our record, and this shows our total sum of now just over 500,000 Berkshire moth records that you can view on this summary map. And you can also get in and see the details of which species have been recorded and who's done the most recording. But there's lots of different ways you can set up these activities. Another one that we use in Berkshire just shows the latest 2 weeks worth of records. So whenever you go to it, it's only showing you the latest 2 weeks. And it just provides a way of keeping up to date with what other people are seeing and whether your species, it seems to be a likely one in that context. And you can also see the latest photos that are being added. So we've got, this is literally from the last couple of weeks. So things like March moth and dotted border and common quaker are beginning to appear in the photo list. One thing I thought would be worth mentioning is the image recognition. I think everyone is familiar with the fact that this is becoming much more widely used. The iRecord apps allow you to have your photos automatically identified, and there are other apps and other systems out there that do the same thing. And this is something that we are actively developing within iRecord at the moment. It's not available on the website yet, but it probably will be in the not too distant future. But as I say, on the iRecord app, it is there. And I find it quite amazingly accurate a lot of the time, but not always. And there's just a couple of examples there of things that it has recognised, and even some of the more tricky species. I thought that the moth in the middle here was uncertain, and the app agreed with me in this case. But you do have to treat it with some caution and sort of apply appropriate checking as well. This one, for instance, it is either a grey dagger or a dark dagger, but as you probably know, those are two species that can't really be distinguished without dissecting them, or at least examining them very closely. And the app has just put this one down as being grey dagger, which is actually quite misleading because it hasn't said anything at all about the fact that there could be, it could equally be a dark dagger. So as I say, you have to treat them with a bit of care. On the micromoth side of things, it also does pretty well. The second image here of the white cloaked shoot, the Gypsonoma sociana, was one that took me quite a long time to identify when I first saw it, but the app seemed to get there straight away. But once again, that doesn't always happen. And this is an example that popped up on social media just the other day. Liz Goodyear put up this admittedly slightly blurry photo of a common plume moth, and that completely confused the app in this case. So, and we can all sort of find examples where it has gone wrong. So for me, the apps are really, really helpful, except when they're completely wrong. And you just have to sort of bear that in mind and apply some judgment as to where you're getting to. Just for a bit of a laugh, really, I thought I'd throw a picture of a genitalia dissection at it. And I was amazed that it actually did come back with the right answer. This is an ear moth that I'd dissected, and it's a rather blurry photo, but even so, the app seemed to recognise it. I've got no idea how reliable that is for other dissections, but the technology is improving all the time, and it is a tool that we've got in the toolbox alongside all the fantastic field guides and other mechanisms that are out there. So it is something that is here to stay, I think. So just to sort of bring us to a conclusion, really, Garden Moth Scheme does not currently directly use iRecord. Obviously, the scheme has its own ways of dealing with data. In principle, it would be possible to set up a recording form in iRecord that sort of mimicked what's needed for Garden Moth Scheme, and that could potentially give the benefit that you could enter records into the Garden Moth Scheme that would then automatically become available to the county moth recorders without you having to do anything else. But obviously, that's a decision for the Garden Moth Scheme. I'm not trying to push you into doing that at all. GMS already does have a very effective system of gathering the records in. So it's entirely up to you whether at some point in the future you wanted to go down this route. But there's absolutely no pressure to do that. So in the meantime, iRecord does offer an option for recording moths and getting them into the county moth system. It's not the only option out there, and all the county recorders deal directly with spreadsheets. A lot of them are still using MapMate and other systems as well. And not all counties like to use iRecord. There are some that prefer that you send your records in via other routes. If you do have records in iRecord and they're not getting to your county Moth recorder, iRecord does allow you to download your own records and get them into a spreadsheet, and you can always send them off to anybody else via that route as well. But yeah, the big message here, as always, is any doubt, any questions, do contact your county Moth recorder and find out what it is that they actually prefer you to do. So that brings me to the end of the talk. If you've got any questions about iRecord, you can contact us on the email address there. And certainly if there's any sort of problems or bugs that you hit in the system, do let us know. We do try to sort of monitor those and keep the system as up to date as we can. And a very big thank you to everybody who does get involved, either on the recording side or on helping with all the verification that goes on in the background. And of course, all of this does require some funding to keep everything going. And through the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, we're grateful to the funders who chip into that. But that brings me to the end. So any questions we can pick up on either now or at the end of the session after Mike's talk, I think.
Thanks, Martin. That's brought a bit of spare time. So we have time for a few questions. I was just fascinated to hear that your automated system can pick up the genitalia. You get the right answer for genitalia of the ear moth. I was amazed by that.
I was amazed by it, and I've only done that once, so that's not a good trial of whether it works a lot of the time. As I say, I just did it for a laugh, really, just to see what it would come up with. And in this particular case, it came up with the right answer. But yeah, I haven't tested it more widely than that yet.
Something to try then for everybody.
Yeah.
To be honest, I'd have thought that would be largely the case with genitalia dissections because they are so diagnostic. And so as long as the input data is there for the app to be able to scan, then I would expect that to be more useful in many ways than the whole organism photos. So I'm not surprised at all, if I'm honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I think one of the problems that we have found in some areas is the difficulty of where there's a sort of relatively common species and a much rarer species. As you'd expect, there are often very much fewer photos available of the rarer species, which means that the automated process has not had sufficient training on the rare species and therefore fails to sort of offer them as an alternative. And I think that might also affect some of the genitalia photos, that it will pick out the commoner ones, but not necessarily know very much about the rare alternatives.
Just a question up there about double recording. I think that is something that has concerned some of the county Moth recorders. If records come in from our record in one direction and then another way to the county recorder, then there could be double counting, and that has been a worry.
Yes, and I think if you are sending records to your county recorder, then it's obviously a good idea to work out with them what the route should be. And if you sent it one way, there's no need to send it another way as well. Inevitably, though, there's always some duplication. It's pretty much impossible to get rid of all duplication across all the different recording schemes that people use. And in most cases, it doesn't cause any sort of major problems. And people who do sort of data analysis on these data sets are very much used to stripping out the duplicates and dealing with them if needed. But obviously, it's something to be avoided wherever possible. And just trying to sort of work out the route you're going to take and stick to it is a good way to go.
Any further questions? We'll come back to when we've got spare time at the end. We'll have a little bit of time, I think, for open discussion. So we come back to those later on. If we perhaps move on now to our final paper, which is Mike Cook, who is the regional coordinator for North East England, and produces the recorders forms, which is a big job every year, and particularly this year when we've made such a big change. So, Mike, where are you? I've lost you. My screen. Mike, are you with us?
You're on.
Yep.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't actually see you for some reason.
I'm there, honest. Right.
Excellent. I've got you now. Right.
What I'm talking about here is how to export your GMS records into a form that can be imported into iRecord and how to do the import. I'd just like to say that Martin's done a great job on improving the import into iRecord. It's a lot easier than it used to be. The background of this is that Northumberland doesn't have a county moth recorder. So the model set up by Butterfly Conservation is that all moth records go into iRecord and then get verified before they're passed up to the National Moth Recording Scheme. With all the Northumberland recorders trying to get their GMS records into iRecord, I thought it would be a good idea if I could automate the process. So if I can share screen. So what I did was to write a macro, did the work. So this is my slightly modified recording form from 2024. And this is the macro does the work. So this I have available a PDF on how to do this, by the way, and anyone can ask for it. So the first thing is to copy everything. Go to the macro and paste special values. A lot of, hang on, let me get rid of this. A lot of people put down extra species at the bottom. They don't go into the GMS database, but what they do is to they're used when we review the species list. So what I'm going to do is to cut these extra species out and insert them immediately below the GMS species. Insert cut cells. Now, the important thing is to try to make sure that all the taxonomic names are correct. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is when I created this, it was with the idea that different people might want to export different quantities of data. So I'm going to select all the June records for export. Too far. And then I just click on export. And there is my export file, which I'm going to save as annual conference. Apparently, iRecord can now deal with Excel files. Originally, it could only deal with comma-separated variables, and I think I still prefer to use CSV files because, so book1.csv, because I suspect the import has less work to do if you save as a CSV file. We get out of there. And we don't need that anymore. Now I'm going to import into iRecord, but I've been careful to go into training mode because these records are already on iRecord. Training mode is very useful if you're not quite sure what you're doing. You want to make sure things work. And then you upload records from a spreadsheet. Browse files. It was book1.csv. I just hope all this works. If you repeatedly importing from exactly the same format file, then you can save as a template and it asks less questions. But we'll go through the whole lot. Next step. Again, I've written a document on how to do this, but basically the survey data set you always use, or I always use, is iRecord import. The spatial system is British National Grid. That's what GMS uses. And I always use the UK master list. And sample method is defined in file. I usually use, for the species, I usually use the taxon. I don't import the vernacular. You can do both. I don't know what happens, but I'll go with the way I usually do. So vernacular not imported, site location name, spatial reference. It doesn't need Vice County because it works that out from the grid reference. Your recorder name, identified by date, quantity, method. I can find this. Method free text. One of the improvements that Martin's team made is that originally there was a very restricted set of possibilities for method. Now you can just use exactly the method you use in the GMS. So it will say Robinson trap 125 watt MV or something like that. Stage is important, and my export program always puts adult into stage because I haven't caught many larvae in the moth trap. Status not imported. Sample comment is important as a sample comment for in the GMS we store the minimum overnight temperature in the sample comment. Let's try the next bit. I thought there might be something like this. Originally, what happened was at the end, you had a list of failed records and you had to go back, edit that, and change that. With this improved import, you can sort this out as you go through. Oh. Where's it gone? Or intricata. I guess it. Anyway, what you do is to find it. I'm can't be bothered to find it now. So
you can type a space in the first few characters of the species name, or you could just type the vernacular and it will find it.
What is the vernacular?
Reyer's pug, that one, I think, isn't it?
Yes, it is. You're right. Don't get the other ones. Thank you. Apply matches. You now can check your field mapping. If you wanted to save a template, this is where you'll save it. You give it a name, start importing records. Forty 41 rows of 41 incomplete, imported, no errors. It normally takes a few minutes to appear in the sort of my record section of iRecords, so I don't want to wait for that because I'm probably overrunning already. As I said, I've got a document telling you how to export and a document telling you how to import. How useful that is to you all, I don't know, but it's there if anyone's interested.
How do people access it, Mike? How do we get hold of it?
Email me. My email is on the website under Northeast Coordinator. I tend to try to keep a track of people who've got them in case there are enhancements or in case anything problems turn up, then I can send out a revised version.
Okay, thanks for that. I saw a question coming up on chat, and I've got a similar question. How important is the vernacular name? Can you use something different? I asked that because I produce a Welsh language version of the recorders form, and that means, of course, all the vernacular names are different.
I mean, my advice would be, in that case, to use the taxonomic names.
It'll cope with that, would it?
I mean, that's what I did then. I just used the taxonomic names because they're more reliable.
Any more questions? For Mike first. Steve already just saying, all my Moth records have gone to Derbyshire Biological Centre. These records go to our record.
Almost certainly not. There are some county record centres do have their own versions of iRecord that they make use of, but I don't think Derbyshire is one of those. So if they no, they won't be on iRecord, and if they're already with the county recorder, I'm not sure who was asking that question. If they're already with the county recorder, then that bit is covered, and if they're already with the record centre, that bit is covered. So in that case, there's probably not much to be gained by putting them into iRecord as well.
Martin.
Yeah, sorry. Can I just come back on that one? Can you hear me?
Yes, Steve.
So I'm a verifier, I'm not the county recorder, so I'm not sure what the final destination is for our records. I mean, we're working its way through putting records on all our personal records on iRecord. I think I'm down to about 2019. I'm not sure if our county, we've got 2 county records for Derbyshire, and I'm not sure if we actually send them on to iRecord, apart from the ones that we're putting on, I've already put on personally. So I forgot what your question was now. But it's something I guess we've got to look at really to make sure they are on iRecord.
Yeah. I'd say that iRecord is a
so
route to the end goal. It's not the end goal.
As records are concerned.
Sorry, Moth. I'd say that iRecord is a route to the end goal. It's not the end goal itself. So if they're not on iRecord, but they're in the right places, you don't need to worry about them being on iRecord.
Can I echo that? Speaking from Lancashire and Cumbria, iRecord is indeed a route into our data systems. Our data then goes on to NMRS. We certainly wouldn't put anything back into iRecord. That's just a way of generating duplicates and sending everything round yet again.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just need to check what out. It's fairly new setup really, because we lost our last county recorder. He passed away a couple of years ago, so it's all work in progress at the moment.
If I can just add something, I wrote this so that to help people in the Northeast input their records into iRecord, but I also offer a service whereby I'll import their records for them. Now, this means that they're there as recorder, and most cases they'll be there as the determiner, but I will own that record. So if they want to edit it in any way, they'll have to go via me.
Okay.
Any more general questions? I'm sure there are quite a lot. Quite a lot on the chat list.
Just let's put my face on. Just going back to Martin, there's so many routes, isn't there, into iRecord, and as a Moth verifier, there's no easy way to determine how many times that's been duplicated. If it's coming from iNaturalist, if it's coming from iRecord, it's coming from wherever, then that one species might be on 3 or 4 times on iRecord. It'd be handy if iRecord could pick them out and give us an idea if it is a duplication.
Yes, I agree with you. However, a very not straightforward thing to do.
No.
Trying to, because records are often, it may well be the same record, but they can sometimes contain different information in the different versions, and actually working out which ones really are complete duplicates and which ones aren't is not an easy thing to do.
No.
And I know that some people do go to a lot of trouble to try and strip out the duplicates. I'm afraid in Berkshire, I only ever strip out duplicates when I encounter them if they cause me a problem. So it's not something I spend a lot of time on, but I know other counties are very, very keen to remove duplicates, and it is a real problem for them. And I think really part of the answer to that, though, is to try and keep in touch with the people who are sending in their records and talk to them, get in touch with them if you possibly can, and just try and encourage them to only send them in via one route or the other, and not to keep sending them in via multiple routes.
Yeah.
But I just say, I mean, certainly in terms of the garden moth scheme where I'm in control of my own records. I send them to the county recorder in a form that he can put them into the local record centre. But we also do some general recording, which we put into iRecord, which are not garden moth scheme records. They're just countryside records we see in the county, my wife and I. And it would be much more uniform for me to be able to use one system. And if they all went through iRecord, our records wouldn't be duplicated. They just go to the local record centre, and the actual county recorder verifies those records anyway. So to me, it's a more streamlined and better, and it isn't duplicating anything. I like that idea.
It's not duplicating anything from our point of view, but it's what Kate and the others in the local record centre have to sort out.
But
I work in a local record centre, and it's a big part of our work is sorting out duplicates. But trying to suppress them at the source is also useful.
But I don't think they could, if in terms of our garden moth scheme records, I don't see how they could get duplicates, because we put them in the system. And we either give them to the county recorder to put in the system, or we put them directly into the system, which is the local record centre system. And it's not duplicating anything.
That's why I said from our point of view, it's not duplicating, but other records going into various systems can be duplicated. Kate has to do a lot of sorting out.
Oh yeah, but I mean, the garden moth scheme are under our control. There's nobody coming to our garden recording what we've just recorded and sending our records in on our behalf. They're or somebody else's behalf. They're our records, so we have control. And I think this is a good way of streamlining a system to avoid duplication, because they go to somebody else who then has to put them into something else. They could be duplicated by somebody else, but we do it directly. That, to me, reduces duplication issues.
Doesn't that?
You'll find that county moth recorders have different views on most things, and you're not going to get 100% agreement on almost anything in terms of all the county moth recorders. So that's just the way it is.
I think as long as each recorder only submits their data to one place, there is not a problem.
I'm sure you're right.
Yeah.
Just a question, will Rothamsted trapping continue, or will there be discontinuity due to 200-watt tungsten lamps no longer being available? Any comments?
Well, that was the essence behind my question earlier with the MVs going off. Do we all just buy a stack of MV bulbs during the course of this summer, or do we accept that things are going to change? And the second thing is, will actinic lamps work off the transformer for an MV lamp?
No, I don't think the systems can be a straight swap. I think you have to change the electrics. I'm going to buy a stock of bulbs. They last pretty well, don't they? So
I've bought a stock of bulbs.
Yeah, made that decision 2 or 3 years ago. I think I've got about maybe eight bulbs that would see me through my lifetime, I'm sure.
I think you would.
I think we need to put them in our will when we finish with them.
I mean, the impression I've got is that actinic bulbs could well go the same way, because they're they contain mercury. They may well end up being banned as well, eventually.
I think there was something interesting going on with the LED moth traps in development at the moment. I think in terms of the MV bulbs being banned, the best replacement at the moment looks to be the 60-watt actinic. But as you say, yeah, there's a possibility that those could go out of fashion too, whereas LED is very, very energy efficient. They can go very bright. But at the moment, I've not seen any, well, very many commercially available, very bright LED traps, but it's something that certainly could be made. And there's have people seen the Leppy LED in development? They've done some work trying to get a broad range of different LEDs in that, so different colours, with the idea of maybe sampling something similar to what MV traps do.
It would be, how many people are using LED traps now? I think we're starting to see them in the GMS data, aren't we? But we don't have much. Is that right, Reuben? When you looked, there was a few, weren't there?
Yeah, I wasn't able to include them in the analysis because I couldn't tell which LED it was.
But what we don't have is any sort of breakdown of what they mean by LED, isn't it? I think it's something very useful to start collecting if we can actually collect not just LED, but actually the detail about what sort of LED it is, and particularly if the commercial ones are coming available, which there'll then be plenty of. We've got a very good way of looking at the as how they compare if people swap from one sort to an LED, because we'll have people in the same gardens who've changed, and that's a very powerful way of working out what the differences are. It's something we'd like to do, but we don't really know about the LEDs yet, do we? Just LEDs, which are a whole pile of things.
In the northeast, out of about 40 or so recorders, I've only got one who uses LEDs, so that's
not used yet.
I don't know if that's typical or not.
Yeah.
Do we know, just out of interest, what manufacturers may be doing in respect of moth traps and the lighting? Is there an active process in hand to sort of produce something to replace the MV lights?
I don't think we have any retailers here this time, do we? So I can't answer that, but I think it's true to say that MV lights will still be usable for some years because people have got stocks and they're still buying them. The actinic lights will last a little bit longer, if not indefinitely. We don't know. So for the time being, at least, we're probably okay. But it would be a good idea, certainly, to run comparisons between the new types of LEDs and find out which ones, how well they work, and which ones work better than others. So I think it's something for a follow-up. Steve, is that something you would be interested in doing?
Yes.
I mean, one rumor I've heard is that Watkins and Doncaster have bought up all the 40-watt actinic U-tubes that they use in their heath traps, and you can only get them from Watkins and Doncaster now because they've completely cornered the market.
That implies that nobody's actually producing 40-watt actinic bulbs now. Is that right?
I don't know. I don't think they're produced in the UK. You might still be able to get them from Eastern Europe or somewhere. I don't know.
Oh well, I'm sure that we'll manage to keep moth trapping in our gardens or whatever. We'll still do it, and we'll still produce data, but perhaps it'll be a little bit more difficult to analyze that data in the future.
I mean, from the point of view of someone who sort of creates the recording forms and inserts things into the moth trap type drop-down menu, I think LEDs are going to be a real problem if you want to actually define what LED are used, because it may have to go to a free-form text field as opposed to a list of predefined LEDs, because there's so many different variants people could use.
So it might be useful for GMS to actually recommend a standard type that the recorders are asked to use.
Well, I think that would be very helpful, because I think we need to be thinking about it, that once one big bulb is going to be no longer be available to buy after this year, and what people should be considering to replace it. And I think that would be something that people with the necessary knowledge could well spend their time letting us know.
It'll take some years to generate that information, of course.
Well, the trouble is, well, maybe, but the trouble is we've only really got to the end of this year, haven't we? Because MVs are not going to be manufactured or sold come the 1st of January.
Well, anybody fancy changing to the thing is, people are starting now for 2025. So I don't think we're going to get many LED results for 2025, because we don't want to be changing midstream. Maybe we can think about suggesting to people that they look around to see what LED bulbs are on the market, and 2026 onwards, try and get a cohort of information.
Mm-hmm.
Any more? Any other questions about all the things we've heard about today?
I was wondering if we've got a plan now that MapMate is no longer supported, if we're going to move to a different system for our database, or it's going to keep going till MapMate fails.
Why is MapMate supported? Why is MapMate no longer supported?
The owner is retiring, or has retired at the end of last year, so no more updates to the system. Or
yeah, Mark Yates has retired. He's hung up his boots.
Right. Okay. Well, that's even more good reason, I think, because everything I do for Arcade Recorder is in a MapMate format, and I think the iRecord route sounds like a better one.
MapMate, well, you'll still be able to use MapMate. It's just not going to come with any updates, any new species, any species names changes. So it would be down to us really to make sure we don't change the name and in the recording sheets.
Les Evans Hill of Butterfly Conservation, or formerly Butterfly Conservation, has said he will produce updates, patches for moth species names, changes, etc., for the foreseeable future. So from that point of view, it is going to carry on. However, my concern is that at some point, the security update by Microsoft, for those of us who use Microsoft computers, is going to render MapMate unusable. As it is, if you've got a Windows 11 touchscreen, it's very, very difficult to get MapMate to run. So at some point, I think we are going to have to move away from MapMate. I keep everything backed up on spreadsheets, backed up on Dropbox, backed up on OneDrive. I've got backed up on hard drives. I've got about probably 5 or 6 different backups of all the GMS data. So it's all there. But at some point, yeah, I think we're going to have to look at moving away from MapMate. And I'm open to suggestions if anybody knows. And I know there was Recorder, but I think that's going away, or Levana is one that Butterfly Conservation used, but I've got no experience with that whatsoever. But if anyone has any great ideas about it, let me know.
I mean, one option would be just to buy, for the GMS to buy a modern copy of Access Database and stick it there.
I think Access Database went years ago. I don't think, because I think MapMate is actually based on that, and I don't think Microsoft have produced Access for quite some time.
Oh, I thought they still had a database, right?
No, I have the Microsoft 365. So I pay an annual fee because that allows me to use broad range of things, and Access has never been on there.
Is there a professional version of that? At one time, Access, you had to buy professional Office.
Yeah, at one point, but no, I don't think it's available at all now, unfortunately.
I think it is. I think it still is available, isn't it? I thought
it is. I'm certainly still running Access databases. The problem with MapMate is it uses a very old version of Access databases, and that's no longer supported. But there are newer versions of Access databases if you just want to separate data to set up.
Yeah, the Office 365, it's part of Office 365, isn't it? It's still got Access.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just looking on my computer. It says it's showing it here.
Yeah, I'm just looking at mine. I've got Access as well. Just one thing is worth looking at with your subscription for Office 365. You may have had an email from Microsoft in the last couple of weeks saying they're raising the price. What you can do with that, the reason that they're raising the price is because they're integrating AI writing tools into the system. But there is the capability to downgrade back to your previous price if you go and log into Microsoft. And it's exactly the same as it was before. It just means that you're opting out of the AI bit. So if you're somebody who doesn't use AI writing, you can save yourself £5 a month by downgrading, and you won't lose anything.
No, I've not had anything saying they're putting up the subscription rate, but I do notice they're going to be getting rid of Publisher from 2026, which I'm quite upset about. Because I use that a lot.
Have we got anybody?
Certainly need to think through this and decide what our best database is going to be. But
I'll look into Access because I really can't recall seeing it on my Microsoft 365, but I shall look into it and see if I can acquire a copy somewhere.
Yeah. Can we leave that to you then, Audrey? And,
yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. Right, it's almost 12:30. Has anybody got a last burning question to finish off with? No, in which case?
All I can say, Norman, is we kicked off our garden moth scheme overnight in an area that is a bit of a desert for moths, really, but nevertheless, we had a much better catch this last night compared with this time last year. So it gives me hope. Maybe the spring's going to be a better one than it was last year. Only one night catch, of course, but I mean, hopefully that's a signal that things are going to be better.
Well, as I said to people who were here early on, I had 11 species last night, which is, I think, pretty good for this time of year.
Well, just for information, Bob, my partner and I are coming down to Pembrokeshire in May. So we're planning bringing a moth trap down and see what we get on the coast.
Excellent. Are you whereabouts are you staying?
I know, well, my mother actually was born in Pembrokeshire in Dale. I can't remember the name of the place exactly, but it's halfway up the coast towards Fishguard.
Okay. You'll get some nice coastal migrants, I guess. A good time of the year to be there. So yeah, you'll do well. You'll do well. Bring the weather with you.
Perhaps I can let you know what we've caught when we get back.
Yeah, that'd be very good. That'd be good. Yeah, excellent.
Right, well, thanks everybody for that. Thanks particularly to our contributors, the presenters. Thanks to you all for coming, and thanks to you all for doing all the things you do for Garden Moth Scheme. I think that's about it.